um, the students' body. Thank you, my compatriots, and I thank you all those who managed to attend this great occasion. Um, Honestly, I was expecting our students to put up a great show, but what I have seen exceeded my expectation. The galaxy of people here, the quality of the setup, the flawless arrangements, the service is typical of what you will say the ideal Sierra Leonean that you should be proud of. So I thank you. The subject for which I have been asked to speak, interestingly, is about nationalism and globalization. What is unique is the fact that in this room, I gathered from the host earlier, her first question was if everybody here is Sierra Leonean. The answer was no. There are members of other countries that are here. And the co-host, I am told, is Professor Willem, is it? Professor Willem was very clear as to the successes of the organization this year. That will not have been the case but for the effort of other nationals. That was very heartening to hear. So therefore, when I'm asked to speak on a subject, whether nationalism benefits or endanger countries in the context of globalization, you can imagine the difficulty. Because without saying a statement, I have seen the advantages of globalization in this room. What made it even worse is that I have been given 20 minutes to speak on this very unique subject. You might have heard from Mr. Cabo earlier, he introduced me as a lawyer, a legal luminary, a politician. These are two combinations that make people never speak short. You do not have a lawyer that speaks briefly, nor a politician that's often short in their speech. I will try. So, I repeat, the question is, will nationalism benefit or endanger countries in the context of globalization? Well, globalization, nationalism, and the relationship between these two concepts have been the subject of debates among scholars, diplomats, and politicians for some time, more especially in recent times. In fact, both concepts have been a puzzle in our contemporary world, and the argument for and against each of these concepts have dominated our intellectual space. You will agree. As a matter of fact, nationalism has had a great deal of difficulty surviving, and some will argue that it has become less important. The notion of an intellectual community of nations, an international community of nations, is essential to understanding why some nations are sometimes willing to give up their sovereignty, at least in part, in order to be accepted globally. We saw this week, only this week, the expansion of the Club of Five Nations that was hitherto called the BRICS, meaning Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to now include Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In fact, we are told that these member states, these 5 member states, receive no less than 40 applications from other countries for membership, i.e., to be a member of the globalized world. Perhaps to better gain an understanding of whether or not nationalism stands to benefit in the context of globalization, it is possible to discern two distinct paradigms of the debate. First is one which submits that nation states and nationalism are losers of history due to the rapid erosion of a stage in the development of humanity with its rich culture about to disappear and give way to the types of lifestyles unsuitable for the increasing global interconnectedness of the planet. The second school of thought submits that nationalism as the most potent and enduring political force that, far from the possibility of disappearing, is in fact gaining strength in response to the challenges of globalization. Both arguments, despite their many compelling differences, share a common understanding of the nature of the relationship between the two concepts of nationalism and globalization. But first, what do these two high sounding terms really mean? What is globalization in the first place? Mindful that many of us use the concept of capitalism to mean globalization. These are concepts that we often use interchangeably. In its simplest form, globalization means the elimination of barriers to trade, communication, and cultural exchange. It refers to the compression of the world and intensification of our consciousness of the world as a whole as we see it in the 21st century. Some social and political commentators have advanced a number of arguments that they see as advantages of globalization. They say, one, it unites people. As you can see, the different nationalities in this room is a product of globalization. Number two, they say it eliminates barriers. It is for this reason that you are here as students under the generosity of the Moroccan government, and it is for the same reason that I am here as your ambassador for the Republic of Sierra Leone. Number three, it has influenced modernization of thoughts. Number four, it contributes to the advancement of technology due to the sharing of ideas by different countries. They say further that number five, it creates an improvement in trade, imports and exports, to name a few. And the paradox is, globalization has in itself enhanced nationalism. I say so because national movements and struggles of some countries are known to have a great influence on others. For example, the African National Congress, ANC in South Africa, is reportedly influenced by the late Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-African ideology. Arguably, some commentators have also opined a number of disadvantages of globalization, including but not limited to, one, a threat to national security and integrity. Of course, you will agree the rapid spread of the coronavirus a few years ago is a product of globalization. I recall the then Minister of Health in my country was ecstatic that in West Africa, Sierra Leone at the time was the only country that had not had a positive case of coronavirus until a Sierra Leonean, on his return from Turkey, he brought it. It's a product of globalization. Two, it dilutes culture due to immigration of people from different parts of the world. Number three, it causes an exploitation of national wealth mineral resources like diamonds, gold, by the so-called foreign investors. As the co-host mentioned earlier, Sierra Leone is a land endowed with natural resources, most of which are in the hands of these foreign investors, a product of globalization. But what then is nationalism? In its simplest form, again, nationalism refers to the feeling of attachment to one another that citizens of a nation have, and to a sense of pride that a nation has in itself. As an ideology, nationalism can be used to promote and defend a particular culture and way of life. The position of the Taliban in Afghanistan is a case in point of nationalism, which some might suggest in its extreme form. For some, nationalism is the foundation of modern society and social solidarity. It is used by politicians to promote national unity and patriotism. It is proclaimed to be the goal of states that seek to further their interest in peace or war to galvanize public opinion in support of their aims. For those with an uncompromising stance in their firm belief and pride in nationalism and national identity, the argument for them is that a nation can become economically vibrant and technologically advanced without taking advantage of globalization. A country can develop scientifically and otherwise without the support of other countries, they argue. That may be a strong case. That may be a very potent point. Because we saw only this week the people of India successfully sent a spacecraft to the moon on Wednesday, the 23rd of August 2023, with limited or no reliance on global or Western technology. You can see, quite rightly so, the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, beaming with pride and waving the Indian flag. And perhaps there can be no better example of a display of nationalism than in the last World Cup in Qatar. For those following football competitions, it was noted that the great footballer Lionel Messi and his French colleague called Mbappe, they both play for a club in Europe. It was further reported that the two men are close friends off the football pitch. Nevertheless, when it came to the defense of their respective national pride, it became a different story, with each of them fiercely battling it out to ensure that the World Cup goes to their country. That is nationalism at its best. If you are to outline some of the key advantages of nationalism, I will submit the following that I have just said earlier, or the key disadvantages of nationalism. I will submit the following. That one is the fact that nationalistic feelings are sometimes cashed in by politicians to advance a political objective, not in the interest of the state. Number two, extreme consciousness can lead to some harmful effects. The greatest example is Hitler's genocide of the Jews. Number three, nationalism can manifest as protectionism. This has a negative impact on the global economy because all countries are economically related to one another. Extreme nationalism by a country can harm its economy, therefore its citizens. Also in the extreme form, it has created xenophobia in some other countries in which people fear that their nationality and traditions will disappear in the face of globalization. Therefore, they create and invent traditions or re-establish old traditions in which they maintain their identity. For those at that end of the spectrum of nationalism or nationalistic ideology, Globalization is a nightmare that is happening in the present and will continue for generations if not aggressively halted. They will prefer to see the wearing of hijab, for example, made compulsory for our female folks, irrespective of their religious beliefs. Anything to the contrary is seen as a Western globalized ideology. As I conclude, it is worth stating that nationalism and globalization can be complementary to one another rather than being contradictory or direct antonyms. Nationalists can be and should be social actors that accept, embrace, and even promote globalizing issues that promote national interest. The coexistence of these two concepts is not a battle in which one is meant to emerge as the winner and the other the loser. It is rather a mutually beneficial coexistence of two perfectly compatible social concepts. The question, permit me to rephrase, is therefore whether or not in these times of globalization, national identity and patriotism are critically relevant. Will you have been here as students had it not been for globalization?